Thank you very much for joining us for the public forum, Trends of Global Crisis in 2025 and Beyond, Implications for the Global South and the Role of Japan, hosted by the Securities Study Group, Sasakawa Peace Foundation. I'll be serving as the master of the ceremony. I'm Shibayama, researcher at the Securities Study Group at the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. Thank you very much for having me as the MC. Now, today's forum has two parts. In part one, we will listen to the lecture by Dr. Comfort Ero, President, International Crisis Group, or ICG, to discuss trends of global crisis in 2025 and beyond, implications for the Global South. And for the panel discussion, we have Mr. Nishida, a researcher, as the moderator to conduct a panel discussion. After the panel discussion, we plan to have exchange with the floor. Mr. Ipeta Nishida is a senior fellow at the Securities Study Group. We plan to end at 30 minutes past 4, but due to how we make a progress, we may run overboard. This forum is video recorded, and the video will be streamed at a later date. So without further ado, I would like to call upon Dr. Atsushi Tsunami, President of Sasakawa Peace Foundation, to welcome you all. Over to you, President Tsunami. Thank you very much for your introduction. I'm Tsunami, President of SPF. Now, thank you once again for coming to take part in the Trends of Global Crisis in 2025 and Beyond, Implications for the Global South and the Role of Japan, hosted by our Securities Study Group. As Prime Minister Ishiba said during his recent policy speech at the Diet, that the international order is being challenged in a major way. The global security environment continues to be in a very severe situation. In 2022 and 2023, we saw a series of large-scale conflicts, such as Russian invasion of Ukraine, Israeli invasion of Gaza, triggered by attacks by Hamas, which has effective control of Gaza in Palestine. If you include many other conflicts, confrontations, and crises in Asia, in our region, in the Middle East and Africa, some say that there are, depending on how you count them, more than 50 of them. This is the largest number of conflicts, confrontations, and crises in the post-war era. Against this backdrop, UNSC, which is supposed to serve as a forum to address international conflicts, is facing its functional limits, and international politics is going through transformation due to political rise of the so-called Global South countries. We need to remind ourselves that there are global challenges such as climate change, technical innovation, demographic changes, and increasing disparities behind all these changes. SPF has P in the middle, and P stands for peace. Peace is perhaps one of those terms that have lost the trust of the people, despite being widely used in the world. As the president, after I took the position of the president of the foundation back in 2020, I have been trying to bring about reform. And we claim ourselves to be the think to an innovative tank. That is our slogan, and we conduct research and study based on our high level of expertise. We have been trying to act together with global partners, focusing on the needs on the ground and we have been reviewing the way we conduct our business, and we are trying to think outside of the box. And since the beginning of the year, I have visited the Middle East a number of times, and I've met with stakeholders in regions, and we have had productive exchange of views. Peace building is, for our foundation, one of the most important activities, and security and international situation analyses should be maximized, used to the maximum extent so that the foundation can make a contribution to global peace. That is my aspiration as the president of this foundation. During this seminar, we have a pleasure of having Dr. Comfort Ero, President of International Crisis Group. It is an NGO providing careful analysis and observation and policy options, and providing policy options to different governments. Dr. Ero will discuss a future conflict trend and implications on the Global South, and I've been looking forward to this forum. After her lecture, we will have a panel discussion, and there Mr. Ando, Senior Vice President of JICA, and other Japanese experts will join for the panel discussion to further deepen our discussion and would like to reaffirm what roles that Japan could possibly play. And Mr. Ando of JICA has been our partner. We are working towards the TICAD to be held next year. We are doing our best to be ready. And the future of TICAD is an area where we will be putting forward our proposals and recommendations, and that is what we are focusing on in terms of our discussion, looking at the situation in the United States. The influence of BRICS is growing as we speak, and that is something that we need to understand. And with the start of the month of December, I'm sure the future of the international situation, particularly the situation next year, is something on your mind. As you know, in the United States, come next year, Donald Trump will make a comeback as the President of the United States. 2 weeks ago, I was in Washington, D.C., and in Washington, D.C., there are preparations underway for the comeback of Donald Trump as the President of the United States, and the role that the United States plays in the international community. People are not necessarily optimistic, and withdrawal by the United States from the global scene is something that we should be ready, and in what way we can make a commitment to the international community, what contribution Japan could possibly make, are a very important point that we need to discuss. And I hear a lot of expectations for the activities of our foundation. It is very timely that we have this seminar, and I hope this seminar will be productive for all our participants. With that, I would like to conclude. Thank you very much.
President Tsuneo, thank you very much for your greeting. Now then, I'd like to call upon Dr. Comfort Ero, President ICG, to deliver her keynote address. Dr. Ero, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and very glad to be here, to be speaking to the Sasakawa Foundation this afternoon. Let me briefly start by explaining who Crisis Group is and what we do before turning to the subject matter for this afternoon as well. Some of you may be familiar with International Crisis Group. It's an organization that was born nearly 30 years ago, founded at a time to reflect and the horrors of the Balkans War, in the Bosnian War, emerged as an organization based on the idea from transatlantic officials and statesmen and diplomats of never again to see the kind of horrors in the Balkans, in Rwanda, apartheid South Africa as well. And it's in that spirit that Crisis Group was born, to sound the alarm, to focus on prevention, and to help craft policies to guide and shape the world of policymakers. And I thank the President for so nicely articulating what Crisis Group stands for. And 30 years on, we continue to focus on that mandate. Crisis Group is spread out in various regions of the world, Latin America, the United States of America, also Asia. We have an office, our headquarters is in Bangkok for the region, although I think there should be several locations given the vastness of Asia. We're also in Europe, our headquarters, Brussels, and the Middle East and North Africa as well. I've been asked to talk about the trends that we're seeing today in terms of global crises, but also to ask about, or to try and sort of unpack what this all means also for the global south. A terminology that is not necessarily new today, but has grown in ascendancy, partly because of the multipolar nature of the international peace and security landscape, and partly also in the context of Ukraine and the Israel-Gaza conflict in the last few years. But it's also for somebody like me who sits in several worlds and has several hats, born in London but of Nigerian heritage, it's an interesting terminology to see how this term has arisen. I was also a student in the era of the non-aligned grouping, and that was very much the formal definition of how you described a number of countries that were non-Western. We also were defined as the Group of 77, and more recently also the other, or in the 1980s, 1970s, those who are south of the Western Hemisphere often were called third world countries. So it's been an interesting evolution how terminologies begin to capture the imagination of international policymakers, of analysts and observers. And these are all interesting shorthand ways on which to try to group a number of countries together. Whether those countries naturally should be in the same camp, we can discuss that, because it's quite also interesting to me as a student of international relations to see that in this camp, broadly called as the Global South, you also have Brazil, you have Turkey, you have the Gulf countries, you have China, you have Russia as well. And not all of these countries naturally should be in the Global South, but we can have a debate on that when we turn to the Q&A. What I want to do is I want to touch on 5 areas in my opening remarks that will inform the panel discussion. First, I want to look broadly at the return of President-elect Trump, and what that means for the Global South. And then I want to turn to Trump, how predictable he will be as an actor in the international community, and what that means again for a number of countries outside of the West as well. And then thirdly, I want to look at what in Crisis Group we see as 3 poles of instability: Europe today, the Middle East, and Asia, and I think particularly for Japan. More broadly, zoom in more broadly on Japan in my 4th part of my presentation, and then finally bring it home here to Japan as well. Let me start with sort of Trump's return and and what that means for the rest of the world. I mean, it's been very interesting. I was saying to your colleagues earlier, and also to colleagues at JICA, that this seems to be the main sort of talking point for everybody, trying to guess and speculate as to what Trump will mean. But this is the world that Trump is going to be entering, and I think it's worth us understanding what the stage that has been set for his return, because it's radically different from where he was before when he was first President of the United States as well. And the world has changed radically. Europe has changed. It has a war in its borders and a war of aggression with Russia. And its security architecture is also being rewritten as we speak also. The Middle East also has fundamentally changed since Trump was first in power. The most significant change is the rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. I set aside the horror of what happened on the 7th of October, but the most significant change is this regional alliance building and shaping that is taking place in the Middle East as well. The other significant change is that major power competition has accelerated from where Trump left off as well. Very much, and this neighborhood will appreciate it very much, that international relations today is set against the backdrop of major competition between the US and China, which has accelerated and deepened, particularly under a democratic President Biden as well. I think the other significant change that was already emerging under President Obama and accelerated under Trump and even escalated again under Biden is what we call a multipolar world. And the reason that is accelerated partly is because the rules-based order itself has become threatened and endangered, largely because of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. And what has been birthed also in this changing rules-based order, and in a sense, we are living in a world between orders. The most significant change is what we are seeing in terms of the rise of middle-sized powers. One group of countries that come under the label of the Global South as well. And then in the midst of this, I think one other fundamental change, which if I were Japan, I would be concerned about, is what is happening within Western society itself and Western politics, and the unpredictability, not just of the United States as an actor, but of the rest of the Western world that is increasingly preoccupied with itself at home. I'm specifically talking about European capitals, whether it's in France. You will notice today there's been a vote of no confidence against the Prime Minister in France, a United Kingdom that is trying to reset its relationships with Europe while trying to safeguard its special relationships with the United States, but a Germany also that is facing quite a precarious challenge, and right-wing populism, not just in the United States, but very much defining and shaping European order. That is the world in which Mr. Trump is operating in. That is the world in which the Global South, in which Japan is trying to shape as well. And I think it's worth understanding that and locating the Global South in there. The reason why we're talking about the Global South more and more today is because of that multipolar nature of the world. And that's also because the rules, the guardrails that used to be the guardians of international relations, the principles in which used to describe and define the way in which states relate to one another, the principle of non-aggression also, the international accountability system, the principles of peacemaking, peacekeeping, peace building, all of these are under significant stress and strain. And within this mix, a number of countries are looking at the traditional players, the architects of the rules-based order, and noticing that they themselves are not necessarily ascribing to those rules, are bending those rules, are ignoring those rules, are shaping new sets of rules, new sets of values that are very much different from the post Cold War order. A number of countries are also asserting their own independence because they see a West that is slightly weaker, a West that is not also projecting a consistency in terms of international rules, a West that is also been exposed either in terms of its own performance in Afghanistan, for example, a West that no longer can dictate the terms and conditions of how other states behave, and a West that has found itself and that has seen the limits of its own intervention or its own ability to shape what international order looks like. And everywhere you look, whether it's in Afghanistan, whether it's in Sudan, whether it's in Azerbaijan, Armenia, whether it's in Myanmar, whether it's in Yemen, you see that the limits of international intervention, the limits of the Western order has been challenged everywhere you go. A good example also is in the Sahel. It's in this backdrop that you see the rise of the global South, a global South that feels that it no longer has to rely or be dependent upon the West to shape its own future. A global South that feels more confident and emboldened to shape and define its own future and not be seen as an agent of the West. A global South that sees the way in which Western countries are able to undermine core principles of international relations, and therefore says that you can no longer lecture us about the rules-based order because what we see instead are double standards. What we also see is hypocrisy, and what we also see is that the guardrails that often shape and determine the way in which states relate to each other have been undermined by the way in which you have performed in the international arena. It's for this reason that you see a more ascendant, assertive class of countries who are challenging the rules as we speak as well. So that is the world in which Trump is coming into. And in a sense, this world not only suits Trump, but it also suits those who believe in the multipolar order. Why? Because they understand the language that Trump speaks. It's a language that is transactional. It's a language that is based on my interests, not just yours, but my interest. It's a language that is based on burden sharing. It's a language that is clear, that doesn't shy away from the rawness of states' interest. It's a language that is steeped in my national interest, nationalistic, it's nativist, it's authoritarian, and it has clarity. It's in this world that a number of countries are not necessarily anxious by the turning up of Mr. Trump, but also see opportunities and see a chance for them to be able to stand up and assert their own independence vis-a-vis Mr. Trump as well. So I put that out there in terms of this is the landscape in which Trump is coming into as well. The other thing that I think is worth understanding from a global South perspective, a number of people have been asking myself, my colleague here, Matt Wheeler, who is part of our Asia program, what should we expect from Team Trump that will also enable us as global South countries to ready ourselves? One of the most interesting observations that I have noticed in various conversations that I've had, whether it's in Latin American countries, in African countries, is there's a sense of less anxiety about the return of Trump. If there is anxiety, if there's worry, if there's trepidation, if there's fear, it's not coming from the global South countries necessarily. In fact, it's coming from traditional Western allies that the US would normally work with. It's coming from European countries. It's coming from European countries that are very nervous about what Trump means about when he comes back into power, negotiation over Russia and Ukraine. It's about Western allies, traditional Western allies, again, a lot of them in Europe, who are concerned about what Trump's proposition may mean for the future of NATO as well. But whereas if you take the conversation to parts of Africa, I mean, I can talk about West Africa, Kenya particularly, Southern Africa, bits of Latin America, particularly with Argentina, parts of Asia, particularly India, there's less anxiety as well because there's a familiar, as I was saying, familiar language. And also when you look at the cast of characters that have been nominated by Trump for his government, there's an air of familiarity with some of the appointments. So if we look in the national security foreign policy arena, somebody like Rubio or Michael Waltz, well, we know his position on China. We know Rubio's position on the most contentious issue today for Trump about Mexico as well, which is a more hardline positioning, and also with Venezuela. We also know the position of some of the defense people in his mission. And there are three pillars that will shape Trump's foreign policy. The primacists, who believe that America will continue to shape and determine what the international landscape will look like. They're the priority restrainers, who want to see less adventurism internationally by the US, and they want the US to pivot towards Asia. And there are those who are slightly more cautious, still want to see the US play a significant role in Europe, but also recognize that the international arena is changing. However, the world in which, as I said, the world in which Trump is entering is also changed. They can't have it all their way, because a group of other countries are now rising to shape international relations in a way that America has not seen before. So, for example, it's Turkey. Turkey itself has been very assertive in terms of shaping developments both within the European sphere, but in the Mediterranean region, and also in the Gulf and in the Horn of Africa. You've got Gulf countries themselves who've got a very clear sense of what national security looks like and what regional alliance looks like going forward in the Gulf region. They look at Trump 1.0 and they say, sure, we had an ironclad relationship with you, but we also understand that when we need you to come in to step in to defend our own security, we cannot guarantee that the US will always be there. And so we have to start defining a regional security alliance for ourselves that is very much less reliant on the United States and more about shoring up and defining our own relationships. Hence, the rapprochement that China was instrumental in shaping between Iran and Saudi Arabia as well. One thing that is likely to be consistent with Trump when he comes into power is that US ironclad relationship with Israel. However, the most significant change is Iran. Iran is not necessarily the major security threat that it posed 4 years ago. So whether Trump will come in with the same maximalist pressure on Iran is debatable. Iran is now part of the BRICS countries. It is building up a worrying alliance, of course, outside of Iran with Russia, North Korea, and China. From a Japanese position, I think one of the key headaches I imagine that you have today is this new alliance that is shaping between Russia, the two Koreas now having a stake in the future of the Ukraine war, and also that relationship, what that relationship means vis-a-vis North Korea and the Korean Peninsula, but also regional security in Asia. That brings me to closer to home, and what that means, what the Global South relationship reset looks like vis-a-vis Trump in the South China Sea, in Asia region, and also in the Indo-Pacific region. Of course, the US, as you know, shapes and positions itself vis-a-vis how it defines its relationship with the US, with China. We don't expect to see any real difference. I expect to see more continuity between what Biden was doing vis-a-vis China, partly because Biden himself was following on from where Trump left, and partly because Trump was also following on from where Obama was projecting. So expect to see a hardening of relationships between Xi Jinping and Trump. The one thing that we hope that he will maintain and keep hold of is that high-level military-to-military dialogue that began under Biden as well. The other thing that I would say also in relation to, for Japan particularly, is how you position yourself vis-a-vis this new axis that is now unfolding between Iran and North Korea and Russia as well. And then the last piece of the jigsaw, in terms of Japan's own thinking, is what the future of the AUKUS relationship will be, particularly with Australia, feeling very anxious itself. And then what will be the consequences, finally, of Trump's one big Trump card around trade and tariffs as well. Normally, for Crisis Group, our business is with international peace and security and with wars rising. And suddenly we find that we have to also think about what trade and tariffs would mean in terms of the future international relations and whether that itself will lead to more tensions, high-stake relationships, and whether that also will lead to some kind of tremendous miscalculation as well. I'll stop there because my time is up, but those are the key points that I wanted to raise ahead of the panel conversation. Thank you very much.
Dr. Ebro, thank you so much for your insightful presentation. I would like to now hand over to Mr. Ipeita Nishida, a Senior Fellow, Sasakawa Peace Foundation, Security Study Group. He will be moderating the panel discussion. I now invite our panelists to be on stage, and the panel discussion will be moderated by Mr. Nishida. Thank you very much for having me as the moderator. As was introduced, I'm Nishida, Sasakawa Peace Foundation. During this panel discussion, each speaker will be speaking in his or her mother tongue. A Japanese panelist will be speaking in Japanese, and Dr. Ero will be speaking in English. So as necessary, please avail yourselves with the simultaneous interpretation service. We've just heard the keynote by Dr. Ero, and we are to discuss how Japan should be engaged in the global situations given the backdrop of global crisis. Keynote by Dr. Ero has referred to Japan, but Japan has been working with the Global South countries. How should we put in perspective our partnerships with the Global South in the past, and with the start of a new era, how Japan can be engaged with the Global South on the backdrop of global crisis. So let me introduce our panelists, Dr. Ero and Mr. Ando, Senior Vice President, JICA, and Mr. Watanabe, Senior Fellow, Sasakawa Peace Foundation. And we also have Dr. Sakabe Tanaka, Assistant Professor, Kyoritsu Women's University. So without further ado, I would like to ask Mr. Ando, Senior Vice President, Japan International Cooperation Agency, to take the floor. JICA is widely known in the international community. Some people call it JICA, others call it JICA. And JICA has had a long tradition of engagement with the Global South in the area of development. So how do you put into perspective global crisis in the Global South, and what has been your engagement with the Global South? I would like to give you 7 or so minutes. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Let me discuss what initiatives we have at JICA, having listened to the wonderful keynote by Dr. Ero. With the start of the new Trump administration, what will happen to the international community? Mr. Watanabe and Dr. Watanabe are experts on that, so they will talk about that. On my part, I would like to focus more on crisis and risks faced by the international community. The risks and crises have transformed, and we now have different sets of crises and conflicts. In a nutshell, it is a compounding crisis. There is interlinkages between different factors and elements, so it has become increasingly complicated and intricate. I know that everybody's eyes are on the situation, conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza, but historically speaking, we have the highest number of conflicts as we speak. And due to prolonged conflicts, we have seen rise in the number of refugees, and now it counts 120 million, including the internally displaced persons. And we have climate change, pandemic, infectious diseases, and poverty, debt, distress, inequality, discrimination are just some of the plethora of issues that interact with each other. And we now face a mixture of all these different interlinked problems. So what is our approach at JICA? I may sound rather naive, but I would like to nevertheless share with you some case studies from our experiences. Now, what are the factors behind conflicts, poverty, discrimination, bias, and distrust in the government and the regimes? There is diminishing distrust by the members of the community to their governments and the regimes, and we need multifaceted approaches. Since the crisis and risks are compounding, we need compounding approaches. In other words, we need to focus on the perspectives of those who face risks. And that is the notion of human security. The government of Japan and Japan have been cherishing this concept as an important concept, the human security. And it is our task to defend firmly human security. When we say human security, it's not just about defending people from the risks when there are risks, but those countries, developing countries, they have to be able to grow and develop with a sense of ownership. They have to be in the driver's seat to build their own nations. And that, I believe, is also a very important vantage point. In that regard, we need to work with the governments and the members of the regional community, and we need to empower them through capacity building initiatives. Briefly, the JICA's approach focusing on human security and supporting the recipient governments. I believe is a concept which can be accepted by different government regimes and different leaders. If he forced them to do elections, they won't accept. But these different governments and regimes, leaders could be receptive to the notion of human security, because we are focusing on defending the people in their countries. And that, I believe, is a very important message that we need to send. And I wanted to share with you 5 photos on the screen to showcase some of the initiatives that JICA have implemented. The first photo, this was taken in South Sudan. This is the youngest, perhaps, the country in the world. And in the photo on the right, we have President Tanaka and President Kiir and Vice President Machar. And this big country was established in 2001, but for half of that period, this country has been inflicted with conflicts because of the power struggle between the president and vice president. And the Freedom Bridge is the bridge that you see in the middle of this slide. And this is to build a network, economic network in the country. And bottom left photo shows our water supply facility. People in the South Sudan will be operating the water supply system. This is to serve 70 to 80% of the population of Juba. And the plan is to expand the water supply there. So what this means is that the government of South Sudan cannot be trusted. I know it is a difficult government, and that is why NGOs have been asked by the Western countries to support the country. And of course, it is important for us to support the country through NGOs, but we need to be able to sustain operations in the country. For that purpose, there is a water supply authority, and we need to work with them. And the government and members of the community have to build a relationship of trust, although it might be some time-consuming. No matter how long it takes, this is something that we need to do. And the second photo is the photo from the Sahel. This is what we have been working in Sahel. We are building that relationship of trust between the community members and the local government and the national government. And there are different programs that we conduct. The left photo is where they are having a discussion on what the development path they want to take. On the right-hand side, we have a photo of community-based school management. Community, school, and the students and faculty members, teachers work together to build a school to enhance the quality of education at a school. That's the initiative. So we have community at the center. We are working on development with the full engagement of the community in the face of violent extremism. This kind of initiative is very effective in containing violent extremism. So this is one of the things that we are working on. This is a very small program, one by one, but we need to build a network and in trying to build a network of these different initiatives. We have also been working with the United Nations and other organizations. The third photo I would like to share with you is there are conflict-affected regions, Middle East, Africa, and others. When they come visit Japan for study tour, we take them to Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Okinawa, and we take them to museums to make them understand the value of peace. How Japan has built a consensus amongst the public on the issue of the importance of peace. In Hiroshima, Nagasaki, we try to have an opportunity for them to engage in a dialogue with the community members in Hiroshima and Nagasaki so that the members of the community here in Japan can share their experiences in rebuilding and reconstructing the communities from the devastation of atomic bombings, for example. The fourth photo was taken in the northern part of Uganda, and we have this program in Uganda. As I said earlier on, there is a large number of refugees in Uganda, and Uganda has taken open door policy, so Uganda has been an active host of refugees. So this is commendable. This is something commendable. And 75% of refugees and displaced persons go to middle-income countries and low-income countries, not to advanced countries. So we need to minimize as much as possible the burden on the shoulders of middle-income and low-income countries. So refugees and host communities need to learn rice growing so that they can be independent, economically independent. This is a program, and this has been highly credited internationally. The last photo I would like to show is the demining center in Cambodia called CMAC, or Cambodia Mine Action Center. Demining operations have been underway for the past 3 decades in Cambodia, and JICA has been supporting capacity building for demining, and Japanese private sector companies have been engaged so that demining can take place in a safe manner with speed. And we are sharing this experience and know-how with demining in Ukraine, Africa, and unexploded bombs in Laos, PDR. And we are working with CMAC in Cambodia to share the knowledge and experiences that we have built over the years. Countries in the Global South, I mean, they have to balance their positions vis-à-vis China, vis-à-vis the United States. They have to work tightrope. And of course, Japan cannot forget about its own national interests, but the people in the Global South will be receptive to such notion as human security, and we need to send a stronger message of the importance of human security, and we need to focus on earning the trust of the people in the community in these conflict-affected countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ando. Japanese international cooperation was criticized for being different from a Western type of international cooperation, but in this day and age, there are uniquely Japanese assistance projects involving governments and support supported by the people, which will create a trust. So human security could be realized and fully functioning to that end. Thank you very much. We will continue and we will ask Mr. Watanabe. Already you heard the keynote address by Comfort-san. She talked about the Trump 2.0. She talked about the international stage, which was different from the past. The Global South is trying to gain independence and they are considering new kind of order. In this context, how do we recognize the resurgence of Trump 2.0, especially when it comes to China, Korean Peninsula, Russia? In recent challenges of international security, we feel various challenges. So how do we strike a balance with the international issues? Time is 5 minutes. Please, floor is yours. Thank you very much. In fact, I was impressed, touched by Dr. Ero's presentation. She was so comprehensive and she was specific regarding the direction of the Trump administration. I'd like to delve deeper into that. Mr. Ando talked about the JICA's activities in relation to human security. Well, maybe this is the pathway for Japan to go into the future. Actually, in maintaining the relationship with the U.S., it is again very important to give you my conclusion first. 2 years ago, we thought that American experts and Japanese experts, we can consider the China strategy. We can consider the more effective strategy vis-a-vis China. It's not, the purpose is not to confront against China, for example, the adventurism of China militarily. How can it be prevented? There can be various suggestions, and one suggestion is Global South. China is increasing its influence over Global South, and Russia is the same. So in this situation, Japan and U.S., how strongly can we recognize this? We know theoretically. Is it going to be fully reflected by the new Trump administration? We don't know. But we ask them to understand. So we will move and we will engage the United States. But the U.S. is not necessarily be there. We have to be active in international community, bearing that in mind. I will go into detail. Dr. Ero talked about the Trump administration 2.0. She talked about primacist. It is the people who take a preference or a primacy over others. The president's assistants nominated Mike Waltz and State Secretary nominee Marco Rubio, senator. So these are the primacists. Now, the conservative Republican, but rather traditionalist. So international stability in the end could lead into the American national interest. These people believe that, but they are not mainstream. But they are positioned in the center stage of the security. So that is giving a sense of release to Japanese people. There are two other groups of people. Sasakawa Peace Foundation has a U.S.-Japan project. And in this American current situation monitor, that is a website, and Professor Satoru Mori is now analyzing the cabinet appointments. Elbridge Colby, former deputy assistant secretary, was the case in point. One is primacist. The primacist, another person, including Colby, the prioritizist. Where do they prioritize? They cannot fight in 4 theaters, so they will place a priority. Priority is in China, not Ukraine. So there shouldn't be any more assistance to Ukraine. So that is the third one is restrainer. So the people are divided into three groups. The restrainer representative would be Mr. Trump himself, and J.D. Vance, next vice president. There could be various different views, but what is important is that Mr. Trump himself is not an isolationist. He's trying to restrain things. In the past, U.S. Just dished out too many in the past to the world. So let's reduce that. That is the sense, especially the involvement in wars and conflicts. I think that is the soul searching that Trump administration doing, thinking over Iraq war and Afghan war. So it's not that bad. It's a soul-searching reflection. At the same time, in Japanese, a proverb, you cool things that cold salad would be cooled down. So once you are injured by something very hot, you will keep your salad, cold salad, even colder. You're burnt, and then you don't want to repeat the burning again. So going forward, U.S. Trump administration will last at least for 4 years, and then there are three ways of thinking in the top people. For Japan, what worries the greatest would be those people who could not engage or involve in conflicts near Japan. And then without a U.S. presence, North Korea and China may do something adventurous. If there is no weight like the United States, as Dr. Ero said, come to think of it, Europe is withdrawing from things. France is receding from Africa. Now, how do we support them by international community? I think there are things that Japan can do a lot, but Japan cannot do everything. Where do we approach? As Mr. Ando suggested, that is one way, human security. And another approach would be this, looking at the United States. I get a hint. Trump administration 1.0, that it was the first administration, and then I had an opportunity to look into U.S. African policy. Trump administration's African policy, what kind of policy do you think it was? Before that, it wasn't different from the previous administration, because Mr. Trump was not interested at all in Africa, and then there were political appointees, and they did not stand in the way. But there is a budget that we have to consider, so including the contribution to the United Nations, U.S. will decrease its contribution in many ways, no question about it. U.S. Fiscal situation is also in a terrible situation. Japan is also terrible. So internationally, the conflict management will become more difficult, and to global south approach will become challenging. So then one thing that Japan can do is that, once again, as I said, with the United States, we should have the effective strategy vis-a-vis China. Is it concentrating only to China the only effective way? No, it is not the case. We have to have a broad-ranged deterrence and restraints. We should discuss with the United States. But before that, Ishiba administration should strengthen its position within Japan. So first, we have to have our house in order, and then think tank or JICA, the International Aid Organization, such organizations, and cooperating with Comfort Sons organization, we will proceed in hand. I think that is the case.
Inside the United States, the Republican approach to international engagement, and with the start of the new Trump administration, what could be the possible avenue for Japan? Thank you very much. That was closely linked to what Mr. Ando said. Thank you very much for that wonderful input. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Sakabe Tanaka to discuss crisis management approach in the international community. I would like to give you 5 or so minutes. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Dr. Ero said at the outset, the number of conflicts is increasing dramatically as we speak. What the international community could do in terms of crisis management in the coming years is something I would like to discuss. ICG is doing a very great job analyzing crises in different parts of the world, and ICG's reports are published in the ICG's website. And these reports are based on field studies on the ground. So this is a detailed reports. And when you look at these reports, we know that the crises that we have are caused by compounding factors, layers and layers of different crises that are leading to the crisis. Now, not just deterioration in security and safety, but the sluggish economic activities, rise in the number of natural disasters, and blatant human rights violations, and major migration taking place. And these phenomena are threats to the people in the Global South. That is exactly what these reports by the ICG tell us. And what are the salient features of the recent crisis? Since 2010 in particular, according to the report by UCDP, the number of crises has been on the rise. And we also need to understand that crises these days take different forms. We have wars between states, like war between Ukraine and Russia. We also have domestic conflicts between the government and insurgents. And criminal organizations and extremist organizations get involved in all these conflicts and wars. So conflicts these days are becoming increasingly dynamic. And many of these conflicts these days are prolonged. Just to give you an example, in Darfur, Sudan, or Nigeria, a shortage of water led to conflicts between nomads and farmers. And making the situation worse, extremists and terrorists took sides. Or look at Myanmar. We see armed ethnic groups that are seriously that have serious discontent with the post-coup junta. And effective control by armed groups have invited domestic division. So the crises and conflicts are becoming increasingly dynamic these days. This is something that we need to understand. And due to the organized violence, we have seen increase in the number of cross-border displaced persons. They are fleeing from organized violence, and the effect of crisis are dispersing, spreading to countries, surrounding countries and neighboring regions. There are spillovers of these conflicts. Now, how should we approach these crises? What should be the crisis management approach? You might recall that Japan's self-defense forces were dispatched to the UN PKO in South Sudan. If you look at the top 10 countries in terms of dispatching the military and police personnel to UN PKO, are all countries in the Global South. Furthermore, AU, African Union, is becoming to form a strong partnership with UN PKO. OAU, which led to AU. Since the days of OAU, AU has long believed that security in Africa should be realized by Africa with a sense of ownership. And there are 8 sub-regional organizations under the umbrella of AU. Some of the 8 sub-regional organizations actively get engaged in conflict resolution in Africa. So how to support refugees in the prolonged conflicts, and how to build nations, how to develop a social infrastructure. I mean, these are different elements and factors that we need to combine in supporting these nations. and AU aspiring to play a leading role in African security with a sense of ownership. So we need to remind ourselves that there are homegrown initiatives from Africa, from a global south. And another point I would like to focus on is conflict prevention, concept of conflict prevention, because if we only act after the conflict, damage would have been already done. So prevention of conflict is becoming increasingly important. And crisis prevention could mean different things. We could have mediation and conciliation, bridging between parties in the conflict to prevent conflicts. And if we go broader, as Mr. Ando mentioned, there could be approaches from the development aspect to eliminate expansion of economic and social inequality, which could be a source of discontent. So we need to engage in crisis management from a broader perspective than the perspective that we have taken traditionally. So what we mean by that is that we need local, regional, and international perspectives. So we need a multi-layered initiative and multi-layered mechanism. In this context, we need to look at how we could prevent crisis. And once we have a crisis on the ground, we need to explore how we could respond to the crisis and how partner countries, including Japan, could support crisis prevention and crisis response from these perspectives. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have said that there are social problems as a premise for the conflicts, and then social approach, economic approach, as well as approach vis-a-vis military conflict. There are various approaches. Japan has been doing various approaches. Going forward, we will have to consider the methods and means of cooperating approaches. Comfort-san, you have heard the comments by panelists. What is your reaction? What is your thinking? Do you have any questions to the panelists? So I'd like to invite your intervention.
Thank you very much. I agreed with everything our panelists were saying, and I was quite interested in the idea of how human security becomes the sort of the framing architecture that Japan takes forward. But just listening to your own definition of what to expect from Trump, I guess the one question I would be interested in asking the panelists is that what do you see as the major priority for Japan going forward, knowing what you know already about President Trump and the incoming administration? How do you think China will position itself, and how do you react to what is one of the interesting observations that we've noticed that was there with Trump 1.0, but it's been accelerated under Biden, is that Washington's own rivals are forming new alliances among themselves that I think could also become a headache, potentially a headache for Japan as well. And I'm talking about Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China. It's an interesting relationship. It's convenient at one level, but it could also shape how you define your own security interests going forward. So I'd be interested in that going forward.
Thank you so much for that. The comment by Dr. Ero, the rise of Trump, resurgence of Trump, what are the priorities for Japan in the face of the new administration in the United States? How to understand, put into a perspective, the likely position that China could take? I know that Mr. Watanabe is to address that question in relation to that human security, the notion. Dr. Ero agrees to the importance of the notion of human security. Now, Japan, what is the plan for Japan to further spread the notion of human security, of course, in the discourse of development policies, human security is a key word that we oftentimes encounter. However, in the international community, it's rather difficult to have people understand the importance of human security, not in terms of the term itself, but the substance of the notion of human security. So how do you make sure that this notion will take a root in the international community? And Dr. Sakabe, you talked about the possible crisis management approach. We have taken political approach, economic, social cooperation approach, and conflict response approach. You talked about as approaches that Japan has used. With regards to response approach in South Sudan, since withdrawing SDF, self-defense forces from South Sudan, Japan seems to be rather passive in terms of doing similar things in different parts of the world, and how Japan should be looking at possible initiatives, similar initiatives in the future. Yes, over to you, Dr. Iro.
Just to add that we are also talking at a time where peacekeeping is under significant challenge. Today, in Africa alone, you saw the military government of Mali kick out the 3 international forces, the French, the regional one, and the United Nations. You saw a copycat in Sudan, and you're seeing a copycat also in the DRC. So how do you then continue to protect the idea of peacekeeping when you're seeing a number of countries quite willingly and able to also kick out the UN as well? So how do you preserve that multilateralism that Japan has also spearheaded?
ありがとうございます。じゃあその質問も加えて
So, Doctor, I would like to first invite Mr. Watanabe. So the question is, with the resurgence of Trump administration, what should be the priority for Japan? What is the priority for Japan? With regards to the priority in the national strategy of Japan, in my view, Japan's national strategy prioritizes survival, prosperity, and dignity of Japan as a nation. Those should be defended. That is at the forefront of the national strategy of Japan. Japan's policy has been closely linked to the U.S. alliance policies, and we have not necessarily been on the same page as the United States, although there are overlaps. But Professor Richard Samuels of MIT published a book, Securing Japan, and Japanese policy towards China. There is a Goldilocks consensus. You might ask, what is Goldilocks consensus? Goldilocks is a girl. It's a picture book, and this is oftentimes used in the financial services sector. Not too hot, not too cold, not too big, not too small. Just the right size, just the right temperature. Due to the U.S.-Japan alliance, the security of Japan and domain defense should be kept. At the same time, our relations, economic relations with China should not be sacrificed. So we have to go the middle. So it's not a either or. We have to balance between the two. If China is too strong in terms of technology, then we need to work with the Biden administration or the U.S. administration so that the high-spec semiconductor equipment, for example, will not be in the hands of China. And this perhaps will be repeated with the Trump administration next year. But one difficulty under the new Trump administration is that the Trump administration will make a further, even more stringent the export control vis-à-vis China. And the new Trump administration could use tariff as a threat to invite compromise from Japan. But speaking of Trump's tariff, Taiwan Strait, if blocked by China. There was this question. Trump said that he will impose more than 150% tariff against China. This is a very interesting proposition, but it is quite scary. When there is a Taiwan contingency, there is no choice but Japan to be embroiled in Taiwan crisis. Prime Minister Abe used to say that the Taiwan contingency, a Japan contingency, we need to prevent this from happening under the Trump administration. But we also don't want China to be to have overwhelming technological advantages. If tariff were to be increased to 10%, 20%, the Japanese automobile and other export industries could be significantly damaged. So this should also be prevented. So I said there is a priority, but there are different priorities, plural, because it is compounding. The challenges posed by the Trump administration are compounding. That is why. But at the same time, what is also important is that existing international order has to be protected. We don't want the existing international order should not be broken. We have multipolar world. We should put a break on the multipolar world. Abe administration did actually try to do that.
では安藤さんお願いいたします。
Ando-san, please. Human security going forward. How are we going to appeal to the international community with the practical use? It's very important. First thing, risk itself is changing these days. Actually, last year, Ogata Sadako Research Institute is JICA's research institute. At this institute, we issued a report of human security in the new age. How do we protect the human security in the new age, new day and era? So that was the report. How to protect the human security? We have to think of state and upper establishment, and we will protect them and then expose the people would be empowered. There are two directions that we can discern in this day and age in order to strengthen it further. Community connection, community networking, and solidarity has to be firmly supported. Thereby, in a compounded way, in a multi-layered way, we can solidly protect things and people. That's what we have to do. Between states, solidarity is possible, but in order to do that, Global South people themselves are contributing to the people of Global South. I think this is very important. South cooperation is the title that we give to this kind of relationship, but in order to solidify this even further, we must do a lot more. JICA's traditional South-South cooperation would be the mother-child handbook. The Japanese creation should be penetrating to the rest of the world, a mother-child handbook. So the civic police of Indonesia, it was a part of military, but it was changed to be useful to the civic society. In a variety of countries, various different stages would be provided to be the stage for activities. Again, about Indonesia. In 1999 until 2003 to 4, there was a process of democratization after the economic crisis. They gained experiences which can be shared with the other parties. So we talk about the Global South. So the responsibility of Global South would be strengthened. Their sense of ownership and accountable activities would be solidified if we follow this approach. Thank you.
ありがとう。
Thank you, Mr. Ando. Through the human security in the new era, enhancing the solidarity in the society and amongst different countries. Dr. Tanaka, over to you. Thank you. Multilateralism. I know that there is rising concerns and anxiety over the multilateralism, future of multilateralism. In terms of our support, what is happening on the ground? We are trying to enhance the quality of crisis management. We need a better quality of crisis management and also distribution. How to share the burden of peacekeeping operations. That is a good example. There is a discussion on that as well. The United Nations Security Council, you may say, is dysfunctional. Meanwhile, there are initiatives to enhance the quality of crisis management. Just to give you an example, towards the last year end, this decision was taken at the UN Security Council. UNSCR 2719 asked for financial contribution to AU-led, African Union-led operation, peace support operations authorized by the Security Council, thereby allowing UN to financially support peace support operations. Of course, the Africans are keen to defend their security, but there is a lack of talent, there is a lack of financial wherewithal. Therefore, Africa needs international community support. And as a result of the discussion did bear fruit in that form. And with regards to UNPKO, the countries that have been dispatching as members to the PKO, they need to secure the safety and security of these personnel while contributing to the stability and peace of the local community. To achieve both, equipments have to be provided, and we need to enhance the capacity of the members of the PKO. And training for the PKO members should be supported not only by those countries that are sending the members to the PKO, but there has to be cooperation amongst UN member countries. And that is actually making a progress. Just to give you one example, there is UN TPP or UN Triangular Partnership Program. So we are now seeing such emergence of such a framework. So how to support UN-led initiatives? This is something that Japan and other countries should make a contribution.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. Now, 3 perspectives. We can continue discussing it. We have already passed 15 minutes overboard with allotted time for the panel discussion. So we will put an end to the panel discussion, and we would like to entertain questions from the audience. We would like to have a good discussion with the audience. If you have a question or comment, please raise your hand to indicate that you have one. We see 2 hands. Microphone will come to you. Yes, the person behind. Thank you. Freelance journalist. I am Miyoshi. I have a question to Watanabe-san. Earlier on, you said that Japan can take human security. That's the only way possible for Japan. I think that you hinted like that. Now, it can be combined with the U.S. security policy. You hoped that there will be a good joining with the U.S. security policy. Now, U.S. may think about the Japanese human security. How do they see it? Democratic administration assessed and appreciated human security, but the Trump Republican administration may not give the same appreciation about the Japanese policy on human security.
Thank you. This is Inoue speaking. Well, many things are happening as we speak. Fundamentally speaking, the global governance is being shaken. That is what is happening. What do you mean? What do we mean by global governance being shaken? Institutional crisis, UN Security Council reform is called for. And it is a philosophical issue as well. Global governance has been supported, underpinned by the set of values of the democracy and rule of law. But everybody is concerned that the U.S., which has been a champion of this, is now governed by Trump and others who are not necessarily keen to defend democracy. And this could have spillover effects around the world, across the globe. That is what we are all concerned about. So what role Japan could play, which is one of the themes of today's discussion. Mr. Ando said that Japan should lead initiatives based on the notion of human security. As far as I'm concerned, human security is freedom from scarcity, deprivation, and freedom from the fear, and the freedom to live with dignity. That's a human security, right? But a human security led by Japan is placing too much emphasis on freedom from scarcity. What about freedom from fear? What about living with dignity? Democratic values and human rights. Japan has been turning a blind eye to that. Japan has been working on building infrastructure and facilities, but a missing piece is philosophy. Is it the case that Japan will be able to continue to play a role without paying close attention to those values? I mean, in the face of China, Cambodia, authoritarian countries. I mean, authoritarian countries, including China, Cambodia, but I don't know whether I should go ahead and say this, but you are like building a Buddha statue without putting a soul in it. I mean, you export Buddha statues abroad, but the spirit or the soul of the Buddha is missing. And what do you mean by soul? Freedom, rule of law, democracy. That's the soul, and that's the spirit and the philosophy. And Japan, I don't think, has done a good job in communicating the values or the philosophy behind the notion of human security. I'm not just asking Mr. Ando to respond to this, but anyone on the panel, I would like to ask this question.
Would that be all right? Well, then, we received 2 questions regarding them. Watanabe-san can talk about Miyoshi-san's question, how U.S. assesses Japanese concept on human security. I think that was the question. Miyoshi-san's question, human security, that was the question. Japanese approach may be a little off balance. It was mentioned the ideal should be more emphasized. I think the questioner said, so Ando-san and Comfort-san, can you talk about it? So can I go first? Thank you. I talked about human security, and I didn't say that we should appeal to the United States about human security. I said that the Japanese human security approach that Ando-san said, when we think of a world order, we can make contribution. We can do it with the United States, but Trump administration wouldn't think about it, and we don't have to say that to the United States. But in the past, the U.S. has taken a lot, and because it is in a predicament, it is leaving, it is abandoning. So Europe cannot do it, so Japan can do it. Free and open Indo-Pacific, that was the concept which was presented at the forum of TICAD by late Prime Minister Abe. Prime Minister Kishida also said it in the United States. But U.S. alone cannot take up all those concepts and ideals on board. Other countries may have to do the burden. So Japan will do what we can do. So you should spend more defense. The Trump administration could say that, but as long as they don't say that, Japan will do dispassionately what we will do, and if we are asked to pay for more defense, then we will elaborately explain that this kind of activity is also important, just like a defense expenditure. Another response to another question is that good part about Japan is that freedom from dears, freedom from deficiency. That's okay to enter. The U.S. is led by ideals. And it may be said, no, one of the reasons why Democrat lost was that in battleground states, economically impoverished people were told too much about the ideals and democracy. I think it was negated by these people. Biden administration, Democratic administration, that's fine. And Japan agrees with that. But if it is done blindly, Global South will not come along.
Mr. Ando? Well, Mr. Watanabe has already responded, so I might be repeating. But freedom, democracy, rule of law, I mean, I fully agree that these are also important. But in the final analysis, we need to let people on the ground choose what is important for them. the risks are becoming increasingly multisectoral. Those in aid community tend to forget that we might be too preoccupied by one single thing like global health, without looking at what is needed by the people on the ground. That is very important part of human security. We need to fully understand what is the need of the local people. I mean, I know that there is a criticism that we are focusing too much on freedom from want. But HDP nexus is the term that used humanitarian stage, developmental stage, and peace-building stage. This HDP nexus should be treated as an ecosystem, as an integrated one, and we need to pick and choose from the whole menu what would satisfy the needs of the people on the ground, people who are faced with risks, people who are threatened. I believe it is a credible philosophy that we should be on the side of people that are on the ground.
Thank you very much, Dr. Iro.
The various Japanese people in the room, and you know, the concepts of human security is almost non-existent in a number of places that you look at right now. I mean, the language is just very different, and you began to talk about it. The reality on the ground. I was intrigued by what you're saying, that Buddha is being transported without a soul, and the soul being democracy and human rights. Even that language itself is losing currency in a number of places. I'll give you a good example because you put the slide up on the Sahel. I mean, we had 2 coups in Mali, one in Burkina and one in Niger, based on the soul that was transported. You can't eat democracy. This was the response from the countries in the Sahel. So the human security framework has its limits because it's not delivering what the people expected it to deliver. Governance is what people are looking for. And then everything else flows from that. So there's increasingly a limit in this notion of human security if it doesn't change facts on the ground. And what are those facts? It's not about democracy, it's about livelihoods. It's about bread and butter issues. It's about what is going to put money on the table for me. And elections and democracy and human rights are not enough anymore in terms of international assistance. That is the lesson we have taken away from what is happening in the Sahel. That is the lesson we're also seeing in the Democratic Republic of Congo. That is exactly what is happening in Sudan. A number of countries are looking now at multilateral cooperation, at peacekeeping, peace building. They're not seeing any return. They're not seeing what they're gaining from all these various international endeavors because it's not changing their lives on the ground. I'm sorry, but I have to be realistic about that. That is the world in which we are operating in, and you have to now think through what the old solutions are no longer enough to address the problem on the ground, and people on the ground are providing their own solutions that are awkward to accept because it's also one of the responses is a military government is becoming the response, even in Sudan. And I was taking note of the places where JICA is working, and even in South Sudan as well, the response is a more hardline military approach. So I think there's a question mark about the future of multilateralism in this kind of very bleak, very hard-nosed response to the global governance architecture.
ありがとうございます。伝統的な
Thank you so much. Traditional international communities engagement is reaching its limits. And that is exactly what we need to review. Give a second thought. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for you to ask other comments and questions. Anybody from the floor? What about others? Just one? I think there are 2 individuals who wish to speak. So we will invite our panelists to respond to the questions by the two individuals before we close the panel discussion and the Q&A. Yes. Hanada, Nikkei newspaper. G20 was, India was the 2023 G20 presidency, and Voice of Global Summit was held by India, and 150 or so countries that took part in the summit. With regards to global governance, will this have any implications on the future of global governance, or was this just a forum for them to express their views, to address some discontent amongst these global South countries? Yes. This is Tanaka speaking. I was intrigued by your discussion. Speaking of international order and UN, the relationship with international order and UN, United Nations has been the bedrock of international order in the post-war era, and the membership has increased, and we now have 193 UN members. So this is the only international organization with that large number of members. Of course, not non-intervention in domestic affairs. There are a set of principles that underpin UN, but the UN has been at the center of building international order after the war. Despite all the principles, including non-intervention in domestic affairs, domestic policies, of course, human rights, democracy, and those philosophies has been suffering a setback. Although for the past 8 years, this has been a focal point of UN activities. So with the rise in the number of membership, given the principles of non-intervention in domestic politics, I mean, there are challenges set forth by Global South. So UN is faced with different challenges as we speak. In terms of UN reform, a Security Council reform is not the only reform we want. We want to see a reform of UN activities themselves. So in the context of UN reform, as Dr. Ero mentioned, the philosophy alone would not suffice. What kind of reform, substantive reform at the UN do you think will be needed to satisfy the needs of the Global South?
Thank you very much. Very important theme was raised. UN's review over activities. Ideal should be redefined in some way. So that was the gist of the question. Now, with that question, we would like to conclude the discussion session. So, Sakabe-san, we will start from Tanaka-san, and 2 minutes each, please. So, Global South-related question that we received. And the Global South's event, how do you assess it? And the UN reform, how do you think about it? And Tanaka-san, you talked about human security, and you emphasized the educational institutions, and it was not mentioned so much according to the questioner. So any idea, Tanaka-sensei? Thank you. Last point, United Nations, how it should be revised, reformed. Basically, as a forum, this is the forum where international community can discuss peace and security and stability. So as a forum, it's a very important forum, no change about the importance. But in parallel with that, there is another point, regional attempts. Regional problems are being solved by the regions. I introduced the African Union's example, and also in the case of EU, they have their unique regional missions dispatched to various regions within the Union. So UN alone, of course, UN is important, and I know that there is no change in terms of the importance of UN as a forum, but large and small international multilateral frameworks can run in parallel. Just one forum cannot be depended upon, absolutely. A variety of frameworks can be utilized. And because of that, precisely because of that, we can have the crisis management in the way that we have. whatever regions, whatever countries, whatever people, we can form coalition and cooperation and collaboration. We always can have dialogue. And Japan is a part of that. That is, in the final analysis, a very important point. So always, we must make efforts where crises exist in whatever regions, and we should have our antenna getting the presence of a crisis wherever the region be.
Mr. Watanabe, Global South Summit hosted by India as the presidency of G20. I should have said this before. What is important about Donald Trump is he is motivated by personal interest, motivated by personal network. Prime Minister Modi could play a significant, important role under the second Trump administration in the United States. A Trump-Modi relationship was strong, and this is continuing. Modi claims to be the leader of Global South. It's very important for them, and he believes that this will lead to higher quality India, and Modi also believes in the importance of deterring China. So Japan should have a thorough dialogue with India because Modi and Trump built a friendly relationship thanks to Abe.
Ando-san, please. Indeed, when it comes to international cooperation, that is fortunately or unfortunately, because there are too many global problems, we have no lack of materials for international collaboration. We can collaborate on climate change, disaster prevention, debt control. So one country alone fails, then that will create a whole global serious situation. So cross-border international collaboration is something that has to happen. We live in an era where we have a multitude of problems and materials for international cooperation so that the whole world does not disintegrate, and we should cooperate.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ero, last but not least.
Because you quoted, you referred to India and Trump, I just wanted to recall something that just happened during, in the lead up to, as the elections was coming to an end in October, a week after calling Modi the nicest human being during the campaign. Trump then named India as the biggest charger of tariffs as well, and reminded China that reminded India that it could also impose reciprocal tax as well. So I think India's a bit nervous about whether Trump will go ahead with his tariffs. On the G20, yes, absolutely. I think it's still relevant because it's a forum. You know, when you look across the world and the tensions that are emerging, and you know, regardless of what you think of Russia, Russia is still an important player. And there aren't that many forums where countries can talk to Russia. And the G20 then becomes really important to that as an opportunity to engage Russia. And, you know, when you think about who can talk to Russia, some of the key actors are part of the G20. It's also an important forum when you think about all the concerns around multilateral reform, around the international financial systems like the Bretton Woods systems, and there's been a lot of talk about reforming these institutions. The body that can enable that can drive that can come up with some ideas around reforming the IFIs is the G20. Some of that started with India. I think Japan tried to advance some thinking around preserving the international rules-based order. And of course, Lula, headlining the G20, was very much thinking about a more inclusive global governance, and doing that through the G20 is important. I completely agree about not assuming that everything around multilateral cooperation can take place at the doorstep of the United Nations. But it's true that the United Nations Security Council, particularly, cannot continue to exist in its current form. The question is how far the reform agenda is going to go now that we've had the summit of the future out of the way and the pact out of the way. Will President Trump continue to carry the torch that was lit by Biden in signaling a willingness by the United States to pursue a reform of the Security Council? They named 2 positions for Africa. They named 1 for Latin America. Will Trump continue that appetite? Will he continue to greenlight that is a big question. And there are other parts of the UN that we need to take seriously for reform as well. So yes to G20, reform of the UN, yes, and also I think the pact of the future also asks the UN to take a greater role in terms of arms control, in terms of regional security, but also in terms of issues around artificial intelligence as well. I will say this, that for all the criticism that has been made about the United Nations, for all the concerns about the dysfunctional nature of the Security Council, for all the misgivings that people have had of the United Nations, nobody has walked away from the United Nations. So despite everything that appears to be wrong with it, it is still the place where even its biggest critics still like to use it as a podium to make grand statements and to beat it up at the same time as well.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. This time round, this is the public seminar, and we had a panel discussion. We wanted to look into the trends of conflicts into the future, as well as Japan's possible role. So in this context, international politics is now entering into the new phase. The traditional Western involvement and engagement, or the confirmation of the roles as we know it, is changing. The United Nations has a certain role. There is a limit, but it is a framework for international collaboration. So within the United Nations, maybe we can emphasize the approaches, as Sakabe-san mentioned. Every region should have certain activities, or cross-regional, cross-national frameworks could be newly introduced and utilized. As Japan, considering the future international cooperation and engagement, we know the growing importance, and as Mr. Ando talked about, the concept of human security would certainly be elevated, not only pursuing the United Nations, but for the peace and stability of the international community, we must get involved. So that was the discussion that we had today. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we went overboard with time by 10 minutes, but we'd like to conclude the panel discussion at this juncture. Please show your appreciation to the panelists with a great round of applause.
Thank you so much. I would like to give the microphone back to the MC. Thank you very much. I would like to thank all the panelists for their wonderful input. I would like the panelists to stay on the stage. I would like to once again thank our participants for joining us for the public seminar, despite your very busy schedules. Outside the hall, there are copies of reports formulated by Security Study Group and Japan-US Group. For those of you who are interested, please drop by at the booth and take any copies that you may want to get. For those of you who have used simultaneous interpretation receivers, please return them at the exit. For your ID cards, please turn them in at the reception on the first floor. Again, thank you so much for joining us for the public seminar. Please make sure that you do not leave anything behind. I will be looking forward to seeing you all on future occasions. Thank you.